Well, I guess we'll get started. My name is Cullum. We're going to be talking about the caring city. And one city comes to mind, London, at the turn of the 20th century, let's say 1910, 1915, something like that. There was a dinner one night. George Bernard Shaw, the great playwright, was there. And the after-dinner speaker got up to give his remarks and said, "I only have 10 minutes to tell you all I know." "Well," said Shaw, "you must speak very slowly." Well, we have a group here that doesn't need to speak slowly at all. They know a great deal more than there will be time to tell you. We have Mayor Betsy Price, right down there of Fort Worth. She was reelected with no opposition last year. There are a lot of politicians who envy that. She grew up in Fort Worth, went to UT Arlington, majored in biology, ran a business that involved titles for cars. And these titles had to be reported to the taxing authorities, and she thought, well, why not be the taxing authority? So she ran for that as a Republican, was elected in 2000, served for 10 years. And for voters to vote for the tax collector for mayor is really quite a compliment to her. So she's full of good ideas and is doing a fabulous job in Fort Worth. Seated right next to her, Anil Menon, who is living for the moment in Bangalore. He's on assignment, as he said, but the assignment has been extended for 3 years. I think he's been there before. He was born in what he says is Bombay, not Mumbai. Bombay being the Portuguese word. He was educated by Portuguese Jesuits and Spanish Jesuits, so look out for him. I heard about the Jesuits once, Anil, if there is nothing they will not consider. So that has been very good for you. He is an expert at marketing. He ran the department at Emory University, has been involved with Yale and Johns Hopkins, then IBM, and now with Cisco, which has him in Bangalore, working on smart and connected communities. And next to him, we have Joel Allison of Dallas. Joel runs 43 hospitals and 500 special care clinics, or care clinics of all kinds. They are in 10 counties in Texas. He presided over a major merger between Baylor and Scott & White last year. And it is the largest nonprofit healthcare organization in Texas, one of the largest in the country. He grew up in Missouri, went to Baylor University on a football scholarship, and he played tackle. And anybody who gets in his way, I would advise you to get out of the way. He exercises an hour and a half every day, and he's very fit. And he needs to be. He's got a tough job. Marc Freedman is quite involved in the second half of life, how to have a really wonderful Act Two. He gives away a prize, $100,000, for the person who has been the most innovative with Act Two. I recommend Hillary Rodham Clinton. She's about to embark on Act 5, and it would seem to me would qualify according to your rules. He went to Smart+, and I learned this morning that he spent a couple of years running a modern dance group in Philadelphia, which I think is wonderful. We've had great dance right here on this stage in Dallas. Went back to Yale, got an MBA, and then ran a program for the Ford Foundation on childhood education, early education for children and education all along, and then discovered that this last half of life really needs attention. He's written a lot of books. One is called The Big Shift, another Encore, Prime Time, The Kindness of Strangers. I'm so happy to see you including a little Tennessee Williams and Streetcar Named Desire. I like literary allusions. Now, these books are far better than the one called Gray Dawn by Pete Peterson. I heard Ted Sorensen say once, he was the great speechwriter for JFK, that in reading Gray Dawn, once you put it down, you cannot pick it up. That's not true of his books. They're very readable, and actually Gray Dawn is better than Ted Sorensen ever said it was. And Esther Dyson, seated right here next to me. Now, Esther, I want you to correct anything I say about you that isn't true, but I've read that she graduated from Harvard and rarely went to class, is a great expert on high tech, doesn't have a telephone at home, and good for you in that regard, lives in New York, but is rarely there, has advised governments, but rarely votes. So it seems to me that in understanding Esther, you have to look at how she grew up. She was in a family of very gifted people. Her father, Freeman Dyson, was a very great physicist. Her mother, Verona Huber Dyson, a fine mathematician. Her brother, George Dyson, a historian of technology. So she had to be original, and she is original. She breezed through journalism at Forbes and the New York Times, got heavily involved in investing in startups, and she's picked them pretty well. She was an early investor in Flickr, which was sold to Yahoo, in BeansNet, which was sold to Sun Microsystems, in MedStory, sold to Microsoft, So she does put me in mind of Silicon Valley. And, you know, I don't know if you feel this way, Esther, but it seems to me that there is just an incredible optimism in Silicon Valley. They truly believe that technology will save the world. Anil probably thinks so too. They remind me a little bit of a guy named Ed Sullivan who had a variety show on television several years ago. A very sunny singer was on that show often named Dinah Shore. And Ed Sullivan said of Dinah Shore, "We've got to teach that girl the meaning of sadness." So I don't think we need to teach you the meaning of sadness, Esther, but I have read that you're a little concerned about startups today. Too many startups, not enough real companies. As you said, cute little apps, chasing cute little apps, competing with cute little apps. What's happened to the big idea?
Well, thank you for this. As you say, I think there's too many apps. There's, especially in Silicon Valley, there are people who have no idea what it's like to live in the real world, which is why I live in New York, not in Silicon Valley. And what I'm doing right now, I don't know how much of an intro you want, is basically running a contest for 5 small communities under 100,000 each to become radically healthier, not with Fitbits and apps, but with the plain old boring things of fixing school lunch, managing pre-diabetes, running hospitals more efficiently, doing more outreach to, as much as you can, avoid people coming to your hospital. And we're using really boring things. Our basic premise is if you do enough of these boring things that even your mother knows you should be doing, you'll actually have a huge impact after 5 years. And we want to collect a lot of data, prove that case, and then have other people steal our ideas.
Well, you're collecting the data from grocery receipts, evidently. How many bikes owned, how many miles walked? Where are you getting these data?
So first of all, it's not a nice white lady from New York coming to Garden City, Kansas and telling people how to live. It's Garden City, Kansas applying and saying, we've already done a few things. Our mayor is working with the school board. We would love your help getting investors who want to invest in social impact bonds, vendors who will actually talk to us even though we're fewer than 100,000 people, maybe a philanthropist or two. We want someone who wants to test out some new approach to asthma prevention. Help us put this all together. And then measuring, we're going to sit down with the 5 communities in September with a bunch of researchers and figure out, well, what are the 5 metrics we should follow? Should we use a composite metric of 29 indicators, which is probably scientifically more interesting, but just doesn't really sing to people? Or should we use high school graduation rate, absenteeism, number of transitions to diabetes? These are measurable and tangible to people, because mostly this is, in a sense, a public education exercise.
Well, I think you said some of your materials, or someone said about your materials, that you want to improve the environment. Now, how are you going to do that? I mean, I think we're looking at serious problems with air and water.
Yeah. So improving the environment is going to depend on a community. Do they have a plant with a pollution problem? There's some people, I think, at ESRI who are measuring sludge, which they can detect toxic elements, they can detect drug use, they can detect all kinds of things. Each community has different problems. And so how you address them, it has to be collective action based on the community rather than government intrusion based on somebody in New York or Washington telling them what they should do.
Well, now, Mayor Price, she could certainly apply, I think, if her city were small enough. Fort Worth is much too large to apply, but you're working on Fit Worth. You may not know it, but she's a great cyclist. I didn't tell you. And if you want to complain to the mayor, you've got to go ride a bicycle with her, or you've got to walk with her. You can't come to her office and just sit. This mayor does not sit. But I have another subject on my mind. You have looked at your pension fund in Fort Worth in recent years to be sure it's stable. We've had some problems with our police and fire pension fund here in Dallas. We hope they're on the way to being solved. But what did you find? Do you have a fund heavily invested in real estate, for example?
No, our fund is very diverse. I mean, it's very diversified. What we found on our fund, and a lot of that goes back to caring cities. How do you define a caring city? A caring city is an engaged city, a city where you reach out to your citizens. It's a little bit like all of you who are here today because you want to glean something from what's being said. You want to take things back to your own leaders and tell them you want to be a part of that city. We've had a lot of talk about technology, a lot of talk about smart cities, re-emerging cities, but the challenge, as opposed to Esther working with smaller cities, is for those of us in large cities, how do you get people, when they're relatively happy with your city, how do you get them engaged? But the pension issue that you ask about, you know, our city, you tend to spend what you have, and the city had gotten to where we were putting 20% of our payroll into the pension fund. It became a non-sustainable amount to be contributing and continued to grow. And for our employees, that meant that their pension fund was not going to be stable, that it might not be there when they wanted it. And so we had to make fairly radical changes, but the changes that we made are very balanced. We left it, and the fund has had a small increase in unfunded liability just recently disclosed, but we knew that was coming because when you make changes to your fund to put all the liabilities on the table, then you're going to see it rise because there were a lot of things that weren't disclosed in that pension. And so we've been able to change them and yet still maintain a defined benefit for our employees. And I think that fits nicely in with connecting your cities and caring about your citizens, engaging them in what you see. We talked a lot about the changes that had to be made. We went to the associations, we went to all the employees. Obviously, we made them first with the general employees because they're subject to our changes, and then worked with our unions on them from there. But all of that is engaged cities and caring cities, and you know, it gets into the, Esther's talking about the health, and you talked about fit worth, and all of those are outreach to citizens because you simply have to engage your citizens. I'm old-fashioned enough to believe that most leaders really don't operate in a vacuum. You're no good to your citizens if we're shaping the technology that we're delivering to them, if we're delivering the services to them that we should be, if we're not getting the feedback back.
Well,
the decisions that we make have to come from the input that we're receiving.
You said you want this year to be the year of technology in Fort Worth, and I think you want to have open data where everybody living there can go online, can find out what the health report was on a restaurant, can find out about zoning questions in their neighborhoods, can find out about building permits, anything else they want to know. And you also want a call center where a person can call City Hall, call one person, and get directed any place in the city government that he or she needs to go. How are you going to do that?
That's right. We realize that most cities the size of ours, we're nearly 800,000 and growing, 16th largest in the nation, are at that critical threshold where technology, we have invested heavily in roads, infrastructure, transportation, police and fire protection, and suddenly we can't continue without raising rates considerably for taxes. To do that, so we have to back up and begin to look at the smart technology. The data is there in many cases if we can just implement that data, if we can pull it out and use it to the benefit of our citizens. That's this year, we're looking at that. How many of you in this room would know if someone said today, I want to call code compliance, what number would you call for your city? Just a few of you. Someone said 311. Very few major cities.
Maybe 911.
Yeah, maybe 911 if you've got a barking dog. But, you know, very few cities have a One Connect system and a one system. We've got to looking at ours and realized there is a 392 easy, and it takes you, but then you get handed off to 20 people before you get to know. So we're looking at consolidating that. You should be able to pick up your smartphone or pick up your tablet, or iPad, which is with you always, connect with your city, let your officials know, let the city manager, let the departments know.
Are you going to have a real person answer the telephone?
Absolutely. The goal is from 8 to 5 to have a person there. Technology's great, but you need that face-to-face or voice-to-voice connection.
Who will transfer you to a real person.
That's right. And the focus of it is not just transfer them, but be able to stay with them on the phone, who they need, and find out if their problem is solved. And have a log that says that you look at the end of the week and say, okay, I've helped 200 people today and 180 of them are solved, so I'll pin the 15 who aren't, and I'll come back and see what happened to them.
Well, the guy sitting next to you would love to solve your problem for a price. Anil Menon.
I've already texted. There's a salesperson waiting right there at the door.
You are in the business of creating a virtual city hall. How does that work?
So let me just step back a little bit, because I think the mayor mentioned something about technologies, and then I'll answer the specific question that you are asking on the virtual hall. This is something that I have a global view, and even though I sit in Bangalore, my wife and kids are not particularly happy, saying, why did we move from New York when you're never here more than 5 days a month? In the last 4 years...
Like Esther.
Yes. The last 4 years I've been to 60 countries, and some of them over a dozen times, like Korea and China and the others. And I see a common thread. So let me just take that first point, because I think it's important to understand digital infrastructure. Most cities are spending a lot of money on physical infrastructure. That is the buildings, the roads, and everything else. But they're not thinking enough about the digital infrastructure, at least at the deep level, and integrating that systematically into the physical infrastructure. It is no different than one of us sitting here saying, I'm going to build a new house, or I'm going to build a new community, but I'm going to worry about water later. I'll worry about electricity later. When you don't worry about the digital infrastructure, you're doing exactly that. You're building a city that is not relevant for the current or for the future. So the question that I ask is, if you had unlimited computing at a reasonable price, if you had unlimited storage at a reasonable price, if everything was connected to everything and you had unlimited bandwidth, and if it was video-based, would you run your healthcare differently? Would you run your education differently? Would you run your city differently? Mm-hmm. And we have in our psychology time and space. We go to the city hall. We go to the hospital. We go to the store. The question is why? Because once you take the space dimension out and the time dimension out, why can't the city government come to us? So we've been working with Nice, for example, and in Barcelona, where we have created a small virtual city hall that gives your land records. And by the way, Nice, it's not the sexiest thing, but actually you can get married in this kiosk in a mall. So you can actually go there and you don't have to drive to the municipal hall. In Amsterdam, so in order to do this, you have to ask a different question. If this is the answer, what is the question? So we asked question in Amsterdam, traffic. Between the hours of 4 and 7 in most cities, 50% of the traffic is people driving around looking for parking spaces. The average Parisian will spend 4 years of their life searching for a parking space. And parking space is the #2 source of revenue for a city, and yet 40% of the parking spaces are empty. So you have a huge asset that is not generating income for you. So we said, if you can put wireless sensors to all the parking spaces, then could you not have an app that says, today I have to go for an interview, I'm running a little late, I want the closest parking, and I'm paying a little bit more for it. So we're working with some cities. So the whole point is you have to ask a different question. Why is there traffic? So if there's traffic coming into municipal halls because they want land records, well, why do they need to come to that location? Go to a location that's less crowded so they don't have to drive too far and they get access to that, because we can do it now. So that's the kind of thing that we are saying when we think about virtual halls. Is don't recreate, because if you're recreating the existing format, it's like the pilot who's saying, I'm lost but making great time.
In other words, make it possible for people to do business with City Hall without coming to City Hall.
Precisely.
Well, now, you've also said that a great growth industry is going to be urban services. What are you talking about? Privatization of garbage collection and police forces and all that sort of thing?
So this is happening worldwide. The first wave of the digital economy was the globalizing of the IT services. For those of us who are in the IT industry, 30 years ago, 25 years ago, if you said your IT systems are going to be managed by some people sitting in Philippines or some other place, you would never have thought it to be true. That's why you asked the question, is there a real person answering the phone? The second wave was globalizing of engineering services. But now we're going to globalize urban services. Because the fact of the matter is, Europe and most of the developed countries aging and shrinking. Take Japan, for example. Japan in 2050 will be 40% over the age of 65 and 20% smaller in size. Germany is going to be 35% over the age of 65 and 14% smaller. In contrast, India, the median age of India is 27. In 2050, the median age of India will be 24. Indonesia's median age is 29, is going to go down to 25. So we have to think through a global way of organizing cities, because there are not enough people in Amsterdam and in Netherlands to run the city to give the same standard.
Yeah, but I'm not following you. What services are we going to organize on a global basis?
So traffic monitoring. Why do you need to have traffic monitoring not being done globally? You don't need to police work. By the way, I speak to the deputy governor of Jakarta, and he says, Anil, can you get me on a consulting basis somebody who can help me with police detecting work? There are a whole bunch of police officers here who are being laid off because the budgets are getting shrunk. But why not create a public-private partnership where a police officer works with an Indonesian police officer on solving crimes? And they will get a new source of revenue. It's a $2 trillion market. There's a company in Israel called Takadu, which is monitoring the water leakages of Singapore sitting in Israel. They're doing it in 4 cities in Australia.
Okay,
so
they're looking at a screen and they're saying, there's a leak over at the XYZ company in Singapore. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So
and then what do they do about it?
They send a signal over there and saying, here's where the leak is, go fix that.
And it's to be hoped that Singapore will have the personnel to go and
Singapore is
fix the leak.
shrinking.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that sounds fascinating. Well, Joel, you know, you've heard a lot, I think, about how wonderful Dallas is, and it is, and we're very proud of this Opera House and the Arts District, but I don't want to tell you that Texas is perfect, and someone who knows it isn't perfect is Joel Allison. He is dealing with the results of the government in Austin, which decided to decline $1.3 billion in Medicaid money to help poor people who are uninsured. So 30% of our people are uninsured, the largest rate in the nation. And this is over 10 years, that $1.3 billion. The question is, they're still uninsured. What does this mean for your hospitals?
Thank you, Lee, and I appreciate all the comments that have been made because this all deals with health care and what are we going to do.
Sure does. They're all going to land on your doorstep. And I don't think is there going to be a virtual hospital, is there? Or yes, you're building virtual hospitals, but there are other freestanding buildings.
Thanks, Anil. We're going to have some virtual care and providers, but to your point, I think people realize Texas has the highest rate of uninsured in the country. 25% across the state, as Lee said, 30% in this area. And we cannot continue to have that exist because one of the things we found out is that when you look at health indexes, one of the way people stay healthy is they have insurance and have access to care and have access to insurance, so it becomes an access issue. The other issue is when you look at rankings, you find that some of the issues from people being uninsured do not have good diets, they do not have good access to prescriptions, to prevention. And so what we're working on, one, is we would like to see more people in Texas covered. If we had expanded Medicaid, there would be 1.5 million more people with insurance in the state of Texas. It is a cost to cities, it's a cost to the employers, it's a cost to taxpayers, because that has to be carried some way.
And they come to your emergency rooms.
And they end up in our emergency rooms, and I just did an interview with Modern Healthcare about talking to states that didn't expand Medicaid, are you seeing an increase in self-pay? And we're seeing that. It is trending up, again, because people do not have access. And as we go forward, one of the keys to, I believe, really dealing with the rising cost of health care in this country and in our state and our city is that we have to get the patient engaged. We have to get the population engaged. And that's our vision, is to do population health management, where we move away from a sick care model where we are doing procedures and just treating people when they're sick, to a prevention and wellness model. And in fact, people that come into our EDs today that are without insurance and have not had access, we have 9 faith-based clinics that we try to give them a medical home. And one of the things we're going to do with our population health management, which is basically built around the 3 different pillars of, 1, better health for the population that we're serving. It could be any population. It could be Medicare, it could be Medicaid, it could be employers direct, or it could be other third-party payers. So it's better health for the population you're serving, better health for the individual, and deliver that at a higher quality by reducing cost. But we cannot get there unless the patient or the community is engaged, and that's where connectivity helps us. Our models, we want to move outside the walls of the hospital. Baylor Scott & White Health has a big initiative around prevention and wellness. The first population that we put into our population health management program, which is through the Baylor Scott & White Quality Alliance, was our own employees and their dependents who are self-insured. And we have a very robust employee health program called Thrive. And as we've watched this, we've been in operation for over 1.5 years. We have our people that are on our insurance plan. They have to we encourage them to be seen by a primary care physician and know their numbers, blood pressures, all of the keys, their body mass index, and that helps us then as we continue to manage care, but we also provide them free screenings. We provide a health coach if they did. 5% of the cost, 5% of the population, any population, 5% with 4 or more chronic diseases, which are there, asthma, hypertension, heart failure, cancer, diabetes, account for 50% of the healthcare dollars spent today. You go to the next 15% with 2 or more chronic diseases, and you're talking about 80% of the cost of healthcare. We need to identify those individuals and manage their health in a better way and do it in the right setting. And that may be in the home with applications where they can have also contact with a person, one of our nurse navigators or nurse coaches, so that we can keep people well and healthy to help reduce that cost. If you did 4 basic things, if everybody did 4 basic things, 1, exercise, 2, and exercise is like 30 minutes a day is all you'd have to do. Eat a healthy diet, don't smoke, and manage your stress. Less than 5% of the population today does all 4 of those. But that's basically what you have to do. We believe in setting an example. So, for example, Baylor Scott & White Health, and Lee probably saw this a couple of years ago, we no longer hire nicotine users because we believe we're in the health business, not in the sick care. And so I think, again, it's putting in programs for your people. We have Thrive Challenges. We have healthy foods in the cafeteria. Now, you can still get a pizza and you can get a hamburger, but if you do the Thrive diet every day, you pay a lot less for that meal. We also have prepared Thrive food branded that you can take home. That's all healthy. The other thing we did was go into the communities to do prevention wellness. It was mentioned earlier. We went in a partnership with the city of Dallas several years ago. In fact, we've been in it for 4 years now. Took an underutilized recreation center in South Dallas, which is a very economically depressed, underserved area. And we were seeing a lot of patients come into our ED too late with diabetes, type 2 diabetes, and they were losing limbs and eyesight. We went down, partnered with the city, expanded it, remodeled it. We have now a fitness center there. We have a physician there. It's a patient-centered medical home for those residents of that community. Those zip codes, we have reduced visits to our ED by 40%. Their A1Cs have come down 50%. Blood pressure is down. We go into the churches, to the communities, to the schools to do prevention and wellness around people related to type 2 diabetes. So again, we have to address this obesity issue. Type 2 diabetes is a part of that. I once heard a doctor say, he talking to a patient, he said, it's not that obesity runs in your family, sir. It's that nobody in your family runs. And,
well, Joel, it sounds to me as if Esther should have stopped by one of your hospitals for breakfast. You went to a 7-Eleven and she couldn't find anything to eat that didn't have sugar or something. What did you finally do?
Well,
we're going to get to Marc quickly. So,
I was looking for protein. There was none here. I ended up getting 2 cheese sticks because they didn't have even yogurt without sugar or cottage cheese. And we are rich people who can drive around. Imagine what it's like if you're poor and you don't have money and you're trying to feed your kids a decent diet. It's crazy. So thank you.
Yeah, and to that point, at the Diabetes Health and Wellness Institute, we have a cooking demonstration area for these people to cook, but it's a food desert. So we have a farmer's market that comes in every week that sells at a huge discount fresh fruits and vegetables to that community.
You're hired.
And that's
well, Marc, Joel, and Esther are going to do such a wonderful job that everybody's going to live longer. And you've been doing a lot of work on this group of people who are not young, but they're not old. And what do you have in mind for them?
Well, I go back to something Anil was saying before. We're facing this extraordinary transformation, not only in the length of lives, but in the composition of society. You talked about Japan, where 40% of the population will be over 65, Germany, South Korea, Italy, similar demographic shifts. And the old model for later life is just not sustainable with these growing numbers. It's not sustainable as individuals to have a balloon payment of 30 years of leisure over these longer lives, and it's not sustainable to send half the population off to the sidelines when many of them are really in an extraordinary position to contribute. And your comment about I feel like we've got this phase of life now that might be characterized as the oxymoronic years, right? The young old and the working retired. We're jamming together all of these phrases that are opposites because I think we're witnessing the emergence of a new stage of life that's between the middle years and anything resembling true old age. So, when I looked at the briefing document for this session, it asked the important question about caring for the elderly population in cities, which is going to be a big issue. But there's also this segment of the population that is ready to be engaged in the way that we've all talked about, and that kind of engagement is good for their health. Freud said that the keys to life were love and work, and I think that that's true all across the life course. That engagement, a sense of purpose, a reason to get up in the morning. But it's also a potential windfall of human capital for cities that I think has been poorly tapped over the past few decades.
I get the impression, though, in reading about your work, that somehow or other, this is going to wind up saving money and benefits for this group of people who are living longer than anybody planned and drawing benefits longer than anybody ever anticipated. And the question is, I know they can find satisfying volunteer work. They can go work for Joel, but can they get paid for it?
Well, there's already a movement afoot of 9 million people who are in what we call encore careers, passion, purpose, and a paycheck. We're very fond of alliterations at our organization. But they're essentially second acts for the greater good. And we're familiar with the Mayor Bloombergs of the world or the Gateses of the world who are doing this on a kind of $1 a year basis. But there's this.
Well, he can afford $1 a year.
Yes, absolutely. And now, in our research, 31 million more people in the second half of life want to have an encore career. And, you put those together, that's 40 million people. They last about a decade in duration. That's 400 million years of human capital that could be addressing problems like health, wellness, health navigators, the human beings answering those phones. Right. But that raises the question of where are the jobs going to be? And I think that there's a kind of damned if you don't, damned if you do phenomenon. If people don't keep contributing, they're lambasted for being these greedy geezers taking America to the cleaners. If they do contribute, they're seen as part of a zero-sum proposition where they're displacing young people. But I think what we really need to do is to not only create more jobs, but to reimagine what a much longer life looks like and how we distribute leisure and productivity according to that. Because, we have these arbitrary notions. 65 was picked up in 1935 as the definition of old age. And as an economist at Stanford, John Chauvin, said we never used 1935 dollars without adjusting them for inflation in 2014, yet we use that age as if it's some eternal verity. It turns out it actually came from the Prussian military pension in the 1870s.
Devised by Bismarck.
It's a 19th century notion.
Yeah.
So we really need to rethink the distribution of productivity and engagement across these longer lives. Well,
you have made some financial suggestions. One is an individual purpose account, like an individual retirement account. Would the one be in replacement? Would it replace the other or be alongside the IRA?
Well,
and both would be tax advantaged. One is tax advantaged, one would be.
Yeah, I mean, it was partly tongue-in-cheek. I read a Wall Street Journal article about boomers stealing money from their kids' 529 accounts to go back to school. And I think, we're so focused on underwriting this long period of leisure, but really people need much more help making transitions to a new phase of life. I'd like to see people be able to take a year or two of Social Security in their 50s to go back to school, to do an internship. We've got a fellowship program that's kind of a gap year for grown-ups. That's a 1-year, half-time fellowship for people coming from the corporate sector who want to use their accumulated experience in the public sector, in community health clinics. Cisco participates in it. It's called an Encore Fellowship. Intel announced a year and a half ago that every retirement eligible employee in America can do one of these Encore fellowships if they're placed. They pay the full stipend for them.
$25,000. Now, they're not going to get far on that $25,000.
Right, but you know, if you're going back to school, you'd
Lots
be
of
paying,
string cheese from 7-Eleven.
Right, right. Exactly.
Can I just add a point to that?
Yes.
Because I think you're asking an interesting question. I want to take it beyond an American context to the world, and especially developing markets. And I just want us to consider a few realities, because it's going to come to our lives. It's not going to stay in geographical boundaries that we can keep them away. Let's take the country of Tanzania. 45 million people, the highest infant mortality for heart diseases below the age of 5. They die, 150,000 children die a year because of some cardiac issue. There's not a single, not one pediatric surgeon, not one pediatric pulmonologist, not one pediatric radiologist in the whole country of Tanzania. So the question that comes up is, now what? But there's a lot of doctors who might be retired. Why not connect them digitally so that they can counsel the general practitioners and save a few lives? So we did that. And it was a Yale returned professor who came, started this thing called teleradiology. They're saving lives. In the process, she's built a business, and she got an offer for $1 billion for a buyout.
Or,
$1 billion.
Or let them go live there. Walter Russell Mead suggested that people be allowed to use Medicare money, perhaps in Mexico or some other part of the world. We don't want to take patients away from Joel Allison, but even so, would that not be a useful thing to do?
Well, that, you know, many of you probably saw Best Exotic Marigold Hotel. That was all about outsourcing the elderly, so maybe that does solve one problem. But I'd much rather engage people, whether it's here or elsewhere. But I do think that engagement theme is very powerful in terms of...
and I think cities can do a great job at engaging people. I mean, we tend to engage. We had a discussion yesterday here about talking about engaging our younger leaders. Why not engage your older leaders to serve, you know, and to mentor those younger ones and to bring those together? And job sharing is a big deal. You've got younger families, mothers and fathers with children who don't, you know, can't work 50 hours a week, you know, a week, and so they can job share, cut down their child care costs, bring in an older retired person to share those jobs with them. And it's the same thing on the health care. I mean, for us at the city, you're going to extend those health care costs and the retirement benefits if we don't continue working on it. So we've got to think wisely about how do we use our human capital and our resources and begin to pull them together, because if we're working on healthy cities, as Joel said, and Esther, on reducing that obesity epidemic and getting people engaged with your city, now you've got a healthier group of older people. I mean, I'm a baby boomer, on the upper end of the baby boomers, and I don't intend, this is a second career for me, and I don't intend to stop, you know, what I'm doing. You can ride your bike, you can run, you can do triathlons.
Esther has a plan for you. You know, she once trained as a cosmonaut, a backup cosmonaut, to fly on the Soyuz, a Russian vehicle, up to the International Space Station. And she discovered from this that the spaceships were pretty good and someday might be able to fly in a suborbital way, not up in orbit, but in a suborbital way, maybe from London to Australia in 2 hours. Do you still think that's possible? During this gap year that Marc would like all of us to have?
What I'm thinking about more honestly is that we need labor regulations and things like that to allow this to happen. I mean, there is so much potential in people in their second and third careers if they're not being kept out by the teachers' unions or by regulations. And you know, regulation is good to make sure they're not child molesters and so forth. But there's a lot of, the world could be much more efficient. The market would work much better if we didn't have a lot of past regulations stopping things like this, and it's something worth considering. How do we?
And a lot of it's a mindset change.
Yeah.
You got to rethink how you're going to spend your precious hours and how you're going to spend your time and who you're going to be engaged with, and whether you're going into public service and offer something back, or whether you're going to continue working and
or run kindergarten or you know daycare.
And by the way, we talk about healthy. We actually don't know how healthy we are. We have no idea. You know, you're going back to your example, you have no clue whether you're healthier today than you were yesterday. Yeah. Most of us have no idea. The only thing we have by way of recognizing we are healthy is we stand on that scale and say, have I lost weight? All that tells you is you're lost in water. It doesn't tell you whether you're healthier.
But
For example, my friend Jay Walker tells me, and you would know the statistic, 50% of the cases of heart attack, for 50% of the cases of heart attack, what do you think is the first symptom?
Sudden death.
Death.
But
Sudden death.
Esther
When
has
you
a
turn and
plan.
die.
Esther has a plan for that too. You didn't know that. You have said that the next great frontier is a non-invasive, no needles, blood test where you can keep track of your blood sugar, your cholesterol, and maybe any number of other markers.
So I have two ideas. The first is the mouse house, and feel free to steal it. Every first grade class, 4 mice, 2 running, 2 sedentary. They're marked so you can tell them apart. 2 eat well and 2 eat the sort of garbage that you find at conferences and in school lunches and so forth. And after 3 or 4 months, if we get lucky, the mice, 2 of the mice will tank and will be sued by people for the ethical treatment of animals. And then in a year or two, yeah, people will be able to monitor their blood sugar in a way that's easy and cheap and non-invasive. And so kids will enjoy, you know, today I ate oatmeal and scrambled eggs, and this is what happened to my blood sugar. The next day I eat a donut and some sugared yogurt. This is what happened to my blood sugar. And it all begins with the kids and maybe with older people who have time. But what we want to change is the way you look at your speedometer or the thing in your car that tells you how much oil you have. We maintain our bodies with far less information than we maintain our cars. And, you know, there's a huge business in car maintenance. We need a business in human body maintenance.
And you got to, like you were going, you got to measure it. Fort Worth's engaged in a Blue Zones project, and many of you are following Blue Zones. And Blue Zones, you know, is a 5-year program to track the health of the community. And the reason that we were is because we've already started our Fit Worth and our engagement. None of this is about nanny states. None of this is about making you give up that hamburger or give up your choices. For those of you who aren't from Texas, that's one of the first things they said when we started looking at Blue Zones. This is Texas, we eat beef. And we said, you don't have to give it up, but you got to make the choices. As city leaders, we have to make sidewalks more available. We have to encourage the schools to get the kids out for walking school buses.
Bring back recess.
Bring back recess. You know, one of the tenements of Blue Zone is wine at 5 because, to Joel's point, it lowers stress. And all of those are products that can help you measure because there's markers along the way that can help us get where we need to go to learn those. But we as city leaders and city people interested in cities, you have to figure out how to design cities, how to engage your citizens, and how to make those choices easier to them. Because reality of, how many of you walked yesterday just to get somewhere? Yeah, a few of you, but you're engaged people. Most people don't. They get in their car to go 2 blocks.
To go to the gym.
To go to the gym.
Yes.
We get in our car to go to the gym.
And they take the escalator in the
How many
gym?
of you get on a bicycle? Yeah, to go to the gym. Those are the kind of things that we truly can encourage in cities. Start small, do them in small. We get out and do rolling town halls. It's part of our engagement piece. And that's one thing people tell you. We like the urban village concept. We like designing the city around a basic core function so that it's not a food desert, that there are restaurants that are offering healthy choices, that our kids go to school and we can work and live in the same type. But for us, we've got to provide that transportation, that access, that connectivity to where they need to be.
Joel, you are building more standalone, smaller facilities, as are other hospitals here and probably elsewhere in the country. It means that we're going to need fewer of the big buildings that you've raised money for in the past. Isn't that right?
Definitely. We're not going to see what I call the big infrastructure, the big boxes, if you will. It's more moving outside those walls into the home. We're going to be able, through the technology and the connectivity, be able to get into the homes using, again, nurse coaches, nurse navigators to go into those homes because, again, that's going to be lower in a cost and it will help that person stay healthier. We're going to do more outpatient. It's moving to more outpatient. Physicians' offices. We're going to see more opportunities through the technology and just where science is going to be able to treat people in somewhere other than in. What we need to do today, though, I have to put this in, we need to get paid for that because the reimbursement mechanism has always been contra to that. You get paid for procedures, you get paid when you go in the house. We need to start recognizing the value of keeping people well. And just to follow up on some of the comments, one of the things that we've been focusing on is how do we provide the care for the elderly population, for the Medicare. I mean, there's 10,000 of us baby boomers a day rolling off. That is going to continue for another 14, 15 years. You also have the situation where if you look at those with chronic diseases, 75% of the people with chronic diseases are under 65. This generation is getting actually healthier. But they're also, because of obesity in our youth, which is an epidemic, I believe, 30% of our population is obese today. That younger generation, if we do not really deal with this in our schools, in our cities, in our homes, will not live as long as this generation that we're part of. They will not have the life that we've had. And again, obesity leads to so many other chronic diseases. It leads to heart failure, it leads to joint problems, and it also has to do, I think, with your mental wellness as well. So all this ties to, do we attack just trying to pay more for health care and more people, or do we try to really go back to what is the root cause we're dealing with? And that's where the cities and the hospitals, again, like the mayor said, we have a great working relationship with our communities, with our cities in both Fort Worth and Dallas. The healthcare and the communities and the cities are working very well together to address this. Just like in Fort Worth to Dallas, the mayor has the MyFi initiative around youth fitness.
Well, now, Marc, we're going to get everybody to lose weight and live longer and be productive. You have some people who are now doing Teach for America in their 50s and 60s. You have the Purple Heart Homes program in Florida. This was a group that started retrofitting foreclosed homes for wounded soldiers. What do you where do you see the most desirable opportunities?
Okay, well, I'm going to go out on a limb and maybe oversimplify things dramatically, but I feel like one of the great tragedies of the last 50 years was creating these new kinds of age-segregated cities, Sun City being the first one, Leisure World, in which we basically told older people to pretend that they were young people, and by virtue of everybody being old, nobody was, in a society that basically rejected this population. And I feel like that goes fundamentally against the grain of how human beings were set up. You know, as you get older, you're aware of your mortality. You start thinking of legacy and generativity. And you really should be nurturing the next generation. That's the cycle of life. I'd like to see us create cities that were all about that, where the role of older people in a society where there's going to be a lot more older people and a lot fewer younger people is what we see grandparents do naturally, but in ways that bridge beyond the family, and that it becomes a norm, a culture, like you were talking about, Mayor Price. That, right, and a purpose that is a better future for future generations.
Well, Joel Allison, Anil Menon, and Mayor Price, Marc Freedman, Esther Dyson, thanks to all of you. And there was a woman in Marshall, Texas, who carried around a tote bag that said, "Only kale can save us now." So go have some kale for lunch, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very good.
Oh,
This is how many minutes are left.
oh, okay. Oh, I never.
You made a mistake.
Hey, we have.
Hold on.
If you would like to ask questions, we have a little time left. Anybody have any questions? Yes, right here. So sorry.
It was just a misreading of the clock.
Excuse me. Got the mic.
Excuse me.
Yes, yes, right here in the front. I think a microphone is on the way.
He's got it right there.
Hi. So I have a question for Joel. Given that the per capita spending on the proportion of GDP in the US on healthcare is so out of step with expenditure in other countries, I was beginning to look hopeful when you talked about shifting your focus from procedure-based reactive intervention to proactive promotion of well-being. But then you made your point about needing to be compensated for that. And I was wondering whether your interest in health promotion couldn't perhaps be coupled with some vision of a less resource-consumptive healthcare sector that could then begin to liberate funds for other forms of expenditure as people take care of learning to live healthier lives without your help, if you succeed.
Sure, and it's a great question. And one of the things I was pointing out was it's just the way we pay for healthcare today, which is not sustainable. It cannot continue. Shifting that to the population health management is to actually be creating a model that pays you for staying healthy and well, and it's less because you don't need as much of the infrastructure to drive that. So basically, what we're doing is helping reduce those costs. We've got to reduce it because it can't continue. Can you put more into public health? Yes, it's going to take partnerships, public and private partnerships that create the resources by saying, okay, let's, like we did, work with the city through their use of an underutilized recreation center to lower the cost in that community and give access to care. So that made it better for the community, and it can become an economic engine because if we can find ways to attract other businesses there outside of health care that maybe help us with what we're doing, it would be wonderful. Pharmaceutical companies, things of that nature. So we begin to move that away from getting paid for procedures and acute care to getting paid for prevention wellness and investing that in the schools and the communities and public health. That's one of the reasons I believe our healthcare costs continue to go up, is we're not spending the dollar in the right area, and we can lower that.
In line with that, cities, the reason that healthy cities is, it's so critical that cities engage their citizens in health and caring and well-being. It's economic development for us. Selfishly, as a leader in a large city, you can bring a lot better jobs, a lot better paying jobs to the city if you can demonstrate that your community's healthier. The health rates are lower, the productivity's higher, you've got a better workforce. Kids who are healthier learn better, so they know their future workforce is going to be better. So you've got that on top of it. It becomes, to have a caring and well city, it becomes economic development for the city.
And just very briefly, I mean, this is the premise behind Hiccup, the way to Wellville, which is my thing. If you spend $3 million now on reducing diabetes or preventing diabetes, you actually will save more than $3 million later on in healthcare costs. The problems are that it takes time, so you have a time gap, and you also have a gap in who spends the money and who gets the benefit. But if you can figure out clever financial instruments to do that, we just need to start thinking longer term about all this stuff.
Yeah, and then just to give you an example, before I talked about our own employees and their dependents in our accountable care organization, the Baylor Scott and White Quality Alliance, we've had over a year and a half. The first year, we saved $14 million in healthcare cost by the way in which we managed the care of the patient. But that also meant that we had other partners that were also helping us do that.
Why don't we do 3 questions, these 3, and then come back for answers? Right here. 1, 2, 3.
Thank you. My name is Marcus McAllister. I work at the School of Public Health in University of Illinois, Chicago, and I work for an organization called KERA Violence. And my question to the panelists was, I work in a lot of cities that we deem as unhealthy cities dealing with gun violence and a lot of other tragic things that go on. And my question to you all, one of the things that we're trying to shift the perception of violence as being a health issue as well, and we treat it as a health issue, and we're trying to get the mind state and shift policy in that direction. And my question to you all is, like, how do you all view that as violence being also a health issue along with wellness and eating well and all the other things you mentioned? Because when you mentioned food deserts, most of the neighborhoods from North Philadelphia to Harlem to Chicago, I mean, the food deserts, they're not there because people don't want to bring their businesses in the areas that already are dealing with violence. So that was just a question. I wanted to know how you all see that as well.
Yes, you know, let's stop right there and then go to the other 2. He's on to something very important. I know you have a crime control center. Violence is a problem. Do cities have any reason to be concerned about how guns are managed in their cities? Mayor, if David Flick is here for the Dallas Morning News, do not cover this part of this. We don't want her to have to leave Texas, and I don't want to leave either for having brought it up. But seriously, it's a problem.
Seriously, you know, yeah, obviously they do, but it's not guns that are the problem. It's the mental health issues. It's the challenge just that you're talking. It's the breakup of the family. It's the fact that the children in your neighborhood are not outside playing with each other. They're not necessarily engaged. Their parents, their grandparents are not committed to being there watching them. It's very circular. So we have to address exactly the questions that you're talking about. The violence and the breakup of the family units, and how do we draw those, the food deserts, the fact that they have to spend a significant amount of their money to go out to get healthy food. As Joel said, bringing farmers markets in, community gardens where people are out working. If you see people working together in the gardens and things, they're less likely to argue with their neighbors and resort to violence. I think it's the tip of the iceberg that cities are just beginning to touch.
I just want to tell you a great anecdote about guns, and I'll be really brief. It was a panel. At the end of it, the medical officer from Walmart was very politely asked, so do you still sell cigarettes, and can you justify that? And he proceeded to say, yeah, we still do sell cigarettes. We believe our business is to fulfill people's needs and wants. We're not there to constrain their choices. But let me assure you, next to the cigarettes, we sell smoking cessation tools. And just so you understand our mentality, we don't want to get in controversy. We also sell guns. So the moderator of the panel asks very politely, and what is it that you sell next to the guns?
Well, yes, I think, were you not there? And then I think we have someone right here on the front row.
Hi, Diane from Waze. So I had a remarkable panel, by the way. Love it. You guys all touched on the notion of campaigning and engagement, but in those early days when you're really out trying to get people to know what you're offering, I guess particularly for Esther, how did you get people to be applying for those programs? And then for the rest of you as well, what tools are you using to get them to know about it? What campaigning are you doing to pull people in who are the tough ones to engage?
I'll give a really brief answer because I don't actually have a very good answer. The first part was simply getting community leaders that already were in some kind of coalition to apply. So we used kind of broader, we talked to lots of population health people, researchers, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, people, quote, already in the business. The second part is going to be much more difficult. How do you reach people in the community who want to keep their hamburgers or their donuts away from, and explain that it's not never eat a hamburger again, but eat in moderation, blah, blah, blah. So engagement is one of the bigger challenges. Again, how do you make it feel like collective action, not intrusion? How do you have people own their problems and come up with their own solutions rather than parachuting in with what somebody far away thinks is right for them who doesn't know their lives?
And I think one of the recent tools of engagements that we used is the mayors have an incredible bully pulpit. You're not very good to your community sitting behind a desk. You simply have to be out talking to people. And you have to use social media. You've got to use Facebook. You've got to use Twitter. You've got to talk about it. This afternoon, we're leaving here, and we'll do a rolling town hall. And we've invited, we post every Wednesday, we do rolling town halls, and we invite citizens to come join us. And we take them all over the city. But not everybody rides bikes. So Saturday mornings, we do walking town halls. And we post in the paper, on Facebook, on Twitter, wherever people are, in the city roundup, which is our city newspaper, or our city, social communication, where we're going to be. You'd be amazed if you put spandex on a body like mine, and people, yeah, she laughed, so the rest of you didn't laugh, but.
You have the police under you, so we won't laugh.
Yeah. But, they'll come talk to you. They'll reach in August in the middle of a hot, sweaty day and give you a note that's about their neighborhood, about the issues they're facing. I think you start very small. I have a faith-based cabinet also that covers the gamut from the imam to the rabbis to the Christian ministers, the black ministers, and you engage them to engage their communications, to start very small, talking about what can their elders do? Can they reach back into a school and help revamp the cafeteria? I have a group called Steer Fort Worth of young leaders, young engaged leaders who had never been touched by cities. And when I started this group 3 years ago, we said, why aren't you engaged with your city? And they said, nobody of any authority has ever asked us to be. And they will come and they will do things. And they went into one of the schools. They're so inspired about lunches and the kind of care that the food that the kids are getting and the engagement. They went in and revamped the school lunch menu as a pilot program in a partnership with our ISD. You start small, and our Blue Zones project is going to take thousands of volunteers. We've hired a staff with, private dollars. There are no city dollars, none of your taxpayer dollars in the Blue Zone project. It's all privately funded because the business community knows that the payoff of the health of our community and the engagement of our community, the vibrancy and the robustness of Fort Worth will be the long-term player. But thousands of volunteers are going to be involved, and we'll take a quadrant of the city at a time and begin to educate people to offer healthy choices in the restaurants, from Burger King to Del Frisco's.
Let's have
and
one
to
last
offer the option for them to be out and be engaged.
Let's have one last question here on the front row.
So I've got a question. Kind of the general sense has been, everyone talks about technology and bringing millennials and rebuilding the cities, and it's a great panel, great discussion, but as a fellow Jesuit, isn't the root cause that you bring, we focus consistently on millennials and the empty nesters, and the real root cause is education in the inner cities the demographic isn't broad enough because the education isn't there. And if you do find a way to do that, you solve a lot of these problems because you get more parental engagement from a broader spectrum, and it'll help you solve a lot of these problems. And to your point, which is the great point, it's more the long term. So how do you look at how do I increase education in the inner cities, and then how do I bring that broader demographic? And I've been involved in Dallas Boys and Girls Club, University of Texas for
Esther, what do you
years.
think?
Yeah, so, I'm very sympathetic to this, but at the same time, I think there's an undercurrent of, if we just teach these people how to do it right, it would be better. And the fact is, there are institutions and an environment that is actively putting up obstacles in their way. It's not just a food desert, it's a food swamp. They can't get to their jobs because the transport isn't there. It's not simply knowing their situation, it's the ability to do something about it. When you have a mayor that listens, that's a first step. But education is clearly a huge part of it, but it's not enough. It's easy to think that education cures everything, but it's certainly part of it. Engage parents who have the time. You need time to even talk to the mayor. You've got 3 kids and 2 jobs. You don't have time to talk to the mayor.
That's a major problem.
But who has the time? This older population,
yes, exactly.
and the need to connect. And I think parents are critical,
send all your people to way to Wellville and help us.
I will point a sign in that direction.
I just would add.
I think we're out of time.
One thing, if I put this in, because it touches on in healthcare, one of the big challenges we have, and it's an issue that isn't going away, it's only going to get bigger, is health literacy. People forget about health literacy as it relates to being able to engage those patients, the cultural diversity, the needs that we're talking about. So it's a great comment about how do we make sure people are hearing and understanding what we're doing to try to keep people well and healthy.
And educating people is an issue. It's one of the biggest challenges that every city, we'll be here for U.S. Conference of Mayors starting on Thursday here in Dallas. And that's one of the biggest topics, not just on the healthcare piece, but education in general and engaging and connecting business community leaders back to education and parents is a critical issue for nearly everyone.
I think cities are great when they have a soul. When the soul starts dying is when these issues happen. Yeah. And I don't think we nourish the soul of a city enough. We talk about the city in a physical sense, not in the sense of the people who live there and the ownership that the people have for their other citizens and for the city. And I think you see that more in other parts, and we need to do a lot more in America also to come back. And I think this crime and everything else is a reflection of a city losing its soul, in my opinion.
Well, that's a very good place to stop, Anil. A city with soul is a city that's going to last. E.B. White wrote once that the great thing about cities is you can choose your spectacle and conserve your soul. So thank you for choosing this spectacle today, and have lunch. Thank you.